Hey, conspiracy theorists, as you know, questioning Albert Bourla, CEO of Pfizer, or Anthony Fauci, former head of everything important, is basically an attack on science itself. So, if there were a test that could have revealed that many of the laws and measures that were undertaken during the pandemic were unnecessary and the CDC ignored that test, then that would be what? Unscientific? It depends on what they say it is, stupid, you bloody conspiracy theorist. You remember Albert Bourla saying that RFK, in questioning certain medications, is questioning science itself. And Albert Bourla, by coincidence, made a bunch of money from certain medications. Read his great book, Moonshot. He's such a hero. Anthony Fauci essentially said in a weird Judge Dredd way, I am science. They collapse their individual identity into dogmas, into doctrines, into ideals so that you can't question them. Oh, why are you still going on about the pandemic? It was just a massive wealth transfer. It just made children stupider. It just made the powerful billionaires more powerful. It just gave the government more power. Why are you going on about it? We got new things to think about now. It's a little thing called freedom, baby. Let's remind ourselves what these smug dictators were telling us just a matter of months ago and try to remember this is the world you're still living in. This is the price you're still paying. When you walk down a high street and you see businesses closed, when you see education standards falling, think how relevant it is then.
What is your level of concern that we're going to discredit public health officials to the point of, look at Russia.
I see you're looking at them and I raise you proxy war with them. And also we can say that they even caused Donald Trump. That's not going to work for long.
They actually have a good vaccine and none of their citizens will take it because they don't trust their own government.
It's very dangerous, Chuck, because a lot of what you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science.
Oh, you are the embodiment of science, are you? What a scientific thing to say. That an entire dogma could be embodied in an individual. That would sound the sort of thing that would come out of the mouth of Einstein or Heisenberg or Isaac Newton. They were always generalizing and coming up with stuff that seemed dogmatic and propagandist, weren't they? That's what we love about those guys, right? Let's see what the private sector's got to say in the figure of Albert Bourla.
What needs to be done to counter this wider assault on vaccines?
I think it's a very difficult situation, and I would say, unfortunately, it's not an assault on vaccines, it's on science.
Yes, on science, you're attacking Galileo. Some of this, though, will become more difficult to accept if we were to learn that there was a test developed during the pandemic that would reveal that asymptomatic people were much less likely of transmitting the virus, because then there'll be no need for everyone to wear masks, right? There'll be no need for social distancing. There'll be no need for all of that surveillance, all those regulations, all of those laws, all of those sales. And then your whole argument would start to look like, God, I suppose, like propaganda and lies, if that were true. So let's learn about this test and its potential repression, or at least the fact that it was ignored, so we can inform ourselves further. In spring 2020, the public was bombarded with a message that would soon permanently embed itself into the national consciousness. People without COVID symptoms could unknowingly be infected and, more importantly, transmit the virus to others. You remember that, right? We all remember. Oh, the thing about this virus is you might not know you have it, but then you could give it to like a grandmother or something like that and kill them. So that's why you should do X, Y, Z. Even though we now know, I believe it's possible to say this on YouTube, that they didn't test on transmissions at Pfizer. This was the justification given by Anthony Fauci, or as I call him, science itself, in the first week of April 2020 for his 180 on community mask recommendations. A lot of people who were asymptomatic were spreading infection, he said, so everyone should wear a mask. There, simple as that. A chorus of public health professionals, including Scott Gottlieb, the former commissioner of the FDA, made the same argument, as did the CDC. The spectre of asymptomatic transmission undergirded not just policies on masks, but on distancing and quarantines as well. A lot of things went on in that 3-year period. We learned that people could be told what to do, people could be told to stay in their house, people could be told to ignore the most sort of primal ceremonial duties in life, weddings, births, funerals, all in order to serve an even higher principle: protect one another, look after the sanctity of life. And if indeed that's what we were doing, what could be more noble than that? And this willingness to come together in pursuit of a noble cause is the one thing that may yet save us. The entire apparatus of our pandemic response, which most consequentially kept millions of healthy children out of full-time school for more than a year, was based on this notion. Now, a paper from researchers at Stanford University School of Conspiracy Theories and Stuff David Icke made up, of medicine and Stanford hospitals, raises an extraordinary prospect. Transmission from asymptomatic people is far less common than we were led to believe. From a special test they they developed, the researchers found a remarkable 96% of people who were PCR positive but without symptoms were not infectious. 96% of people who were asymptomatic, or another way of saying that would be nearly all of them. Most people who don't have symptoms, of course, are not infected. So the likelihood of someone who is not noticeably sick actually being infected and infectious was exceedingly rare. Negligible. Not something where you would, for example, make everyone in the world wear masks, make everyone in the world stay inside their house. Now, I know it's hard for some of you to hear this. I know it's gratifying for others. I know some of you are like, I knew I was right. When other people, it's like, oh, God. This means that much of the actions we were told or compelled to take, including an acceptance of all those closed or half-empty schools, had little to no benefit. All of those lockdowns, all of the things your kids went through, all of the mental health suffering, all of the failure of small businesses was a waste of time. Worse still, the novel test at Stanford that showed a very low rate of infectious asymptomatic people who had tested positive was available as early as May 2020. Yet the CDC and other health authorities did nothing. And all the while they were doing that, by the way, they were saying science, science, follow the science. That's not very scientific, is it? Interesting that they didn't grip hold of that test and celebrate it. Why wouldn't that be? Let me know in the chat. Despite the narrative, the idea that substantial portions of infections were acquired from people without symptoms never had a strong evidence base. I remember listening to that on the radio and seeing it on TV. Just because you don't have symptoms doesn't mean you can't spread the virus. Never had a strong evidence base. In June 2020, Dr. Maria van Kerkhove, head of the World Health Organization's Emerging Diseases and Zoonosis Unit, said that transmission from asymptomatic people was very rare. So just a month later, the World Health Organization said it's rare. There was a test available a month earlier than that proved it, and the WHO said it. Strange. This conclusion was based on a number of countries doing very detailed contact tracing, she said. Oh yeah, because remember they made us all put stuff on our phones so that they could capture our data and observe us. But it was only for the pandemic, right? Because, it couldn't be for any other reason. It was just because even asymptomatic people could be spreading the virus. Oh no, that's not true, is it? No, it's just to make sure that you've taken the medications because the medications help prevent transmission. Oh, that's not true, is it? So then why did we have to do all that? It's like, could there be any other motivation? The next day, after criticism from some health professionals, WHO officials walked back her statement and Van Kerkhove said it was a complex question. Since yesterday, I've realised that it's a complex question. Authors of an editorial reviewing the evidence of asymptomatic transmission published in BMJ in December 2020 said, searching for people who are asymptomatic yet infectious is like searching for needles that appear and reappear transiently in haystacks. It's already hard to look for a needle in a haystack. Whoa, God, oh my God, it's wave, it's a particle. Follow the science. Follow the needle. What a haystack. Some views went in the other direction. The following month, a paper in JAMA Network Open suggested that more than half of all transmission came from infected people without symptoms. Naturally, this finding, which supported the health authorities' messaging and justified various community interventions, was covered everywhere, from CNN to PBS to NBC to Fox. So one study they ignore, and another study they really cover and pay attention to. Almost as if the mainstream media is presenting you some information and denying you other information. Yet this conclusion was based on mathematical models, which are based on numerous assumptions and subjective choices by the researchers, which is to say in layman's terms, is a guesstimate. They ignored the one that was based on empirical research and evidence. They highlighted the maths one.
Oh, I reckon that maybe if we'd carry the Y over there, then if we were to extrapolate that naturally, then everyone should do what the government says. And I suppose a side effect of this would be that Moderna and Pfizer and a lot of those guys probably benefit. But let's forget about all that for a while and get in your house and put a mask on just to check. Who are our sponsors on the show? You've already said their names. Oh, great. Should I say them again? Yeah, why not? Pfizer. Well, if you're going to do stuff like this, you're going to need allies, you're going to need sponsors, you're going to need supporters. And by Jove, we have them. Here's me doing a little advert. I'm going to try and make it entertaining. Stay to the end if you would. We are in the age of big data. What does that mean? It means that we've been spied on and turned into zeros and ones rather than chromosomes and a limitless spirit. I need to tell you that you can fight back against the shady, evil, sinister forces who are busy sourcing and indexing your personal information or bothering you with robotic-sounding phone calls. Tea or coffee? Do you want a holiday? Thanks to Incogni, you can stick it to those unscrupulous data brokers who've got nothing better to do than archive information like your date of birth,
phone number, IP address, dimensions of your genitals, shopping habits, and God knows what else. That's because those good people at Incogni can delete your personal information and ensure that those data brokers can't source your details ever again. It's a bit of a relief to feel that, actually. I don't want them having my information. Create an account with Incogni using my link in the description below, it's just there, and tell them whose personal data you'd like to remove. Grant them the right to work on your behalf to remove your data from the broker's databases, and then relax and wait for notifications from all the brokers and email lists you've been removed from. You'll be astonished to see. And there's even more good news, because the first 100 people that go to my link, incogni.com/Brad, will receive 60% off. Let's go and see now what that other version of me is doing and if he's indeed stuck with this hat choice. In short, plenty of studies have demonstrated that indeed people without symptoms can transmit to others. That's never been a mystery. The question has never been, can people without symptoms transmit SARS-CoV-2, but rather to what extent this occurs in the general population. So that's a significant question. If it's 100% of asymptomatic people, then obviously there's legitimacy behind measures such as double mask, keep apart, stay in your house in an unprecedented fashion. But if it's 4%, then we have to have a different conversation, don't we, about the various competing interests: mental health, small businesses, general fitness, liberty, freedom. All of those things are back on the table. The Stanford test does not answer that question specifically, but it tells us something related that's more important. How likely is it for someone who has COVID but doesn't have symptoms to be infectious? Most everyone has heard of the standard PCR test, which detects whether someone has the virus, but it cannot detect whether the person is capable of infecting others. In May 2020, the Stanford researchers created a specific PCR test that could do this, the minor strand test. A pretty significant breakthrough, one might imagine, in a world that was dealing with something so seismic and traumatic. The purpose of the test, Dr. Benjamin Pinsky, one of the authors of the original paper on the test, explained, was to help clinicians in the hospital accurately find out if patients were infectious or not. Yeah, I get it. Hospitals were delaying procedures and delaying treatments such as chemotherapy and implementing various infection control measures unnecessarily on patients who tested positive on a regular PCR test but who were not infectious. We all went through that, right? Oh, there's nothing wrong with me. Oh, I can't do X, Y, Z. Well, imagine instead of like going to an event or whatever, it was going to get chemotherapy. That test would be pretty significant, I would argue. Let me know in the chat. The minor strand test gave a definitive answer one way or the other. To be clear about the importance of all this, as early as May and June 2020, a test existed that if it had been rolled out in medical centres and regular labs nationwide, could have enabled people to know for certain whether they were infectious or not. Even if you were a very cautious person, you go, am I infectious? Oh, right, I'm going to go see my grandma or whatever because this test has revealed that I am categorically not infectious, therefore I can go and tend to a relative and their other needs. There are so many areas where this would have been useful, where it actually perfectly makes the argument. Science, the importance of testing, the importance of trust in those bodies, an opportunity to have a conversation where, oh no, these people are clearly not pursuing an agenda either to regulate a population or to profit. That's the basic argument, isn't it? That, oh, did the pandemic serve the ability of governments to regulate and control at a time when more democracy is clearly an option? Did it get used to help companies to profit because of various factors? In a conversation around this and the release of this test would have meant that we would have gone, oh no, because otherwise they wouldn't have released that test. That's what we would have had to have said, but they didn't release that test. Unlike the ambiguities of epidemiological studies or models, this was a biological test. The CDC ultimately published Pinsky and his colleagues' paper about the test in January 2021, but it began use at Stanford more than 7 months earlier. Not only is it an alternative model, it was a more effective model, not based on mathematics, conjecture. It was based on, oh, well, we just see by using this test. Isn't that extraordinary that that wasn't taken advantage of? This raises serious questions for those in charge of the CDC, NIH, NIAID, for why resources were not allocated toward making the test broadly available. I've got a few hunches, and I don't think they'll be answering those questions, do you? Good luck with those, Rand Paul. Though the test was developed for use in hospitals, its utility outside of a medical setting is obvious. Regular people could have paid for the test to find out after they got over a bout of COVID whether they were still infectious or not, enabling them to go to work, visit relatives and so on. Millions of kids could have tested out of isolation. More broadly, the CDC could have immediately conducted a huge study to actually answer the question health officials had only been conjecturing about. What % of positive people without symptoms have the capability of infecting others? All upside if your objective is to protect a population, to protect an economy, to protect across a number of intersecting factors, mental health, etc. This test was a godsend. Why was this godsend test ignored? Or a science send? Enter the second groundbreaking piece to this story. Researchers at Stanford later looked at data from this test from July of 2020 through April 2022 and answered the question health authorities neglected to answer. And what they found out does not match the narrative about a common threat of people walking around without symptoms infecting others. For the majority of the pandemic, only 4% of asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2 PCR positive patients were shown to be infectious. During the Omicron wave, the percentage peaked at about 25%. So there was some variety and variation. It's all data that would have been invaluable. We can't narrativize it just to our own ends. We could have used science to create better conditions for everyone, all of us. It could have been something that we were genuinely all in together, as it was for about 15 minutes at the beginning of the pandemic, if you can remember that, before we all started thinking, wait a minute, are we being exploited again? Dr. Ralph Taylor, an infectious diseases fellow at Stanford, said, the probability of a kid in class who is not sick actually being infectious is very low. Think about it this way. Even if every single student in a school without symptoms was infected, 96% of them still weren't capable of transmitting to others. Yet, of course, most people without symptoms are not infected. Moreover, just because 4% were technically capable of infecting others, that does not mean that in actuality they had a sufficient amount of replicating virus to do so. We are talking about a subgroup of a subgroup of a subgroup. How extraordinary. A subgroup of a subgroup of a subgroup. It's fractaling down into minutiae, isn't it? And yet, the most extreme measures were taken. Under what circumstances would that make sense if there is an agenda that's not related to the well-being of the population? And I'd invite you at this moment to consider, when you look across society more broadly, does it look like everything's being arranged? Quick, what do we do? What's best for everyone? Does it look like that in economics? Does it look like that in justice? Does it look like that in democracy? What's best for everyone? Or does it look like they look for opportunities to benefit an economic elite? Let me know in the chat. Outside of hospitals, the harms were arguably far more extensive. Schools, if they were open at all, operated at half capacity in order to comply with distancing rules. In many states, all children were required to mask all of the time, and students were quarantined repeatedly for long stretches of time, even though they were not infectious. All of these rules that kept healthy children home or in masks were based on the idea that we didn't know who could be infected and contagious. But we could have known. We should have known. Why didn't we know? We were made to believe that each of us was a potential unwitting one-person WMD. Did they have those WMDs? I don't remember. Who can forget those video illustrations all over social media and major news outlets of little red poison dots floating out of people's mouths and noses toward innocent individuals nearby? While medical centres and other places with particularly vulnerable people may have benefited for some time from the more stringent rules, schools, as they did in Sweden, and most of society could have simply followed the classic advice, if you're sick, stay at home, and we would have ended up in the same place. But possibly with some different results in different areas of life. Isn't this yet another piece of information that makes you query the underlying philosophy behind the pandemic? Whether it was unconscious, whether it was ineptitude, or by design, just for a moment remember the events you missed, the inconvenience you experienced, the money you lost, the relatives you missed, the funerals you didn't go to. Just for a moment, think about how your children have been affected, whether or not people took their own lives because they couldn't cope with being in isolated circumstances, whether chemotherapy, heart disease medications were lost out on, whether resources were directed incorrectly, whether or not you were made to feel that you were not doing the right thing because of particular medications. Every single measure appears to have been designed to impede freedom and maximize profit. Appears to have been designed that way. Whether it was unconscious, whether it was ineptitude, or by design, I'm not suggesting malfeasance of this scale. It's not my job to do that. I don't have access to all of the information in the world. It seems that much of the world's most important information is kept from us. At this point, can you, with hand on heart, continue to call people conspiracy theorists because they don't accept what they are told by the media, the government, and big corporations? I don't think you can. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the chat. It's much more important. Give us your opinions, please. If you can, spread this information around. Remember, you can spread this even if you don't have any symptoms of being a conspiracy theorist. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. Turn on the notification bell. The algorithm doesn't want you thinking about stuff like this. It wants you compliant and dumb. The WHO still determine what can be said on this platform. More important than any of that is that you please, if you can, stay free.